Hey, what's up guys? It's Art Book Addiction here, and we're here with a new artist journey video. So today, we're going to be talking about traditional media versus digital media, right? Since we've recently been talking about NFTs, I wanted to really get to like the core of the issue between the two, the two different media, right? But yeah, I have the unique perspective of working traditionally and digitally, right? Some people, they like to choose one or the other, right? I've had my feet in both, so I think I have a good amount to say on it, right? But before we start the video, please hit that like, hit that subscribe, check out my prints and Patreon if you want to support the channel. With that, let's get into this. Okay, so just to give you a little background on basically my how I basically used both, right? So when I was in high school, I practiced using a lot of traditional media, right? So our teacher had us working in charcoal, right? I worked in oil paint, I worked in watercolor. I tried a whole bunch of different traditional media back when I was in in high school, right? And in college as well, in art school, they force you to use traditional media. So it's like it's basically like kind of like a requirement that you've touched the stuff, right? But I like it and I've excelled at it, right? But during my college years and actually a little bit in high school, I did do a lot of digital media stuff, right? I worked in Photoshop. I've used Painter before. I've tried Illustrator. I'm not really a big fan of it, but most of my stuff is done in Photoshop, like most of you guys, right? And now I could see the differences between the two, right? The differences, and basically, okay, so we're talking about the value, right? So the hot topic, the NFT, right? So NFT is supposed to be a way to make a digital painting worth as much as a traditional painting, right? But it's it's not, right? That's just the core of it, right? Because at the end of the day, a digital painting is not a physical item, right? I guess you could print it and then sell the print. That's always an option, and it becomes more of a physical object that way. But it's not the same as having an actual piece that you made with pigment and you use an actual pen or what have you, right? So basically, if you had two drawings, right, the exact same drawing, literally the same, right, and one was done digitally and one was done traditionally, right, the traditional will be worth more because there is an original, right? Of course, you could do the same thing where you take a photo or you scan it, right, and then you could sell it as copies, right? But the copies will never be as worth as much as an original, right? And that's just the inherent, that's just the way it is, because the original is what produces the copies, right? So unlike a JPEG, right, or NFT, or digital file, what have you, right? The JPEG, if you make a copy of it, will usually be an exact same copy, right? Or you could do the whatever alterations, digital, it doesn't matter, right? But basically, because it stems from something that can be copied exactly, right, then it kind of loses its value, right? So if you're looking at original, okay, let's say I have a watercolor painting, right? Even if I scanned it, okay, even if I made every single thing perfect, it looks almost exactly like it will never look exactly like the original piece, right? And that is because it's an object, right? So a good example of this is because I'm an oil painter now, right? I've gone from I went from traditional into digital for a very long time, and then back to traditional because of my hand issues, basically, right? And basically, when you have a piece that's an actual object, right, the way the light will hit it, right, will change the color and context of the painting, right? And with a file, it doesn't really do that as much, right? Like the prints, my prints back there, right here, see these, right? They're not really that changed by the light, right? Of course, you know, it'll be darker, or you know, like if it's yellow, it'll be more yellow, right? But in the context of a painting, right, the way the light reflects off of it, it has a certain depth to it, right? Especially for an oil painting, right? Because there are, you know, layers of marks. You know, you can make a very flat painting, right? But still, it is using real pigment, right? It's using real, it's basically like a real object, okay? And you're using colors that cannot be produced inside of Photoshop, right? So that's what makes a huge difference in the finish of a piece, right? And so that's what, like, you know, that's what the charm of an original is, right? You get to see what the artist saw when they made it, right? With the digital version, it's like I said, it's almost exactly the same. Of course, there's like computer screens where you see like, oh, it's a little bit different here, a little different there, but it's not the same as looking at something that has the real pigment, right? And the real pigment makes a real difference, okay? Because there are colors that you cannot really reproduce inside of a digital, in like Photoshop, right? It's hard to reproduce, and even then, because it's being backlit by the screen, it changes the context of the color, right? So, you know, computers, they use CMYK, right, or RGB, right? So RGB is just a mix of those colors, right? While in real life, when you're using paints and pigments, right, the way colors interact is completely different, right? So this is more like color theory stuff, but like basically like in real life, okay, if you're using like in real life, if you mix something like green, or sorry, blue and yellow, it's not gonna make a green, okay? It's gonna make like a slightly warmer, like kind of grayish, right? Almost, right? Of course, like if you mix it enough, like it could kind of get there, but it's never gonna be quite like that, like you see in like Photoshop, right? Where if you like you put a color and then you like I guess you don't really mix it in Photoshop, right? But basically it's because it's using light, like the computer is using light, okay, and the painting is using pigment, right? And so pigment in its own right has a higher value, okay? Of course, the things that like really matter, like skill and finish and stuff like that, well, that's all up to the artist, right? But if we're talking about like the exact same pictures, well, then there becomes the value discrepancy between the two, right? And at the core of it, I think that the finish that you can get with traditional media is very different than the finish you can get from digital media, right? And what does that mean? What does that mean? I'm talking about a huge aspect which is very important to me and, like, you know, just in art in general, and that is chaos, okay? Right? So if you see a lot of digital paintings, right, you'll see that they work very, very hard and use like all these kinds of, you know, texture brushes. Maybe not, maybe they don't, but like for example, like if you're trying to like mimic like an oil painting, right, or just like a painterly look, right, a lot of artists will use all these different brushes, different strokes, right, to try to mimic it, right? Maybe they'll put like a texture behind it to make it feel like, oh, this is like on canvas or something, right? But you lose the chaos aspect, right? The beauty of digital is that you have absolute control right, and speed, right? However, because of that absolute control, it makes the artwork have a certain look to it, right? So like, let's say you get like a pencil drawing, right? The pencil drawing will have inherently more chaos than a digital drawing, right? Because with a pencil drawing, there is you're literally scraping graphite against a, like, you know, either a smooth or a rough surface, but still, like, the line is not perfect, right? Even though it may look like very straight and stuff, there is just a little bit of chaos in the line, right? Just a little bit, like maybe you got a handshake, or the pencil itself, it just doesn't go on perfectly, you know, onto the paper consistently like the way a digital drawing would, right? And because of that, it loses some charm, some humanity to it, right? So if you got like I said, if you got the same drawing and you did it digitally and you had a traditional version, right? The traditional would usually look better, right? And that's because of, like, you know, that's more of like a human thing, right? And like sometimes people can be like, oh, it's my, you know, opinion, right? But in most cases, I think people would agree that, like, because of the more chaotic nature of traditional media, it has a little bit more of a charm to it, more of like a handcrafted feel to it, right? And often that feels better than something that's like, you know, you have something handcrafted versus something that's like factory made, right? I'm not saying that art is factory made or digital art is factory made, but because of the tools, it could have a similar look to other things, right? And you know, and digital is the standard now, right? And that's not a bad thing, because I understand why. Like I said, I went digital for years and years. I never thought that I would go back, right? But it's just, you know, life circumstances maybe had to change that, right? But it's the main appeal for digital is speed, right? You don't have to wait for things to dry, right? Of course, you know, like, there's an argument to be made, right, that if you got good enough traditionally, you could match the speed that you would digitally, right? But if you master both tools, right, if you're proficient with both tools, you'll know that if you're trying to make something traditionally, right, often doing the digital version is going to be faster, right, and more efficient, right? However, and this is from my perspective, right, traditional media will usually lead to less injury, okay? Digital media, right, like doing work on like a Wacom tablet or a Wacom Cintiq, right, will often lead to a lot of hand issues, okay? And that's from, like, this is coming from me, from personal, my own personal account, right, and like accounts of other artists that I've seen who work, right. I've like, you know, things that's very noticeable is that people who work in traditional media, right, will often have way less hand problems, way less injury, right. And the way I basically kind of try to sum it up, right, is like, let's say like you have a brush, right, and canvas, right. So when you have the brush against the canvas, right, the brush has some give, right, because it's you know, it has hairs, right, and the canvas has some give. Even if it's like wood, right, the wood and the brush, there's some leeway, right, when you press against, right. Of course you have to still press against hard sometimes, but there's much more give, right. When you're working with let me see if I could, I don't have my Wacom tablet pen anymore. So let's say like you have the Wacom tablet, right, and then the stylus, right. When you have an impact, right, it's like tapping against glass, right. And anybody who's worked in digital media for long enough knows and feels this pain, right. Some will last longer than others, right. Some will never have a hand problem, right. Maybe that's from a combination of a good rest and good posture and stuff. But from what I've noticed, anybody who's worked really hard digitally, right, will have a slew of hand issues, right? So that's a big factor to consider, right? But if you want to be competitive in the modern field, you have to use digital, right? So it's one of those things, right? I mean, you could be competitive traditionally, right? It just limits the kind of market that you're going to be in, right? So there's a lot of factors to consider when you're choosing what you want to do. And like I said, the finish, right? Do you often find your work to be too stiff, right? Like there's not enough like energy in it, right? Well, possibly it's because you're working digitally, right? And maybe your stuff will look better traditionally, right? That is what I have found, okay? Because it's like I said, it's hard to add the chaos element, the miracle stroke, right? You don't know, like that's another thing, the mystery of art, right? So with digital stuff, everything has to be very deliberate, right? I feel like there is less context for having like that beautiful accident, right? That the Bob Ross that's a good mistake. You know what I mean? It works, right? With digital, everything has to be precise, precision, right? And like usually people have to be like they have to notice every little mistake, right? To like, you know, to make things like super sharp, right? And that's not often the case, right? That's not always the case, but because of the precision of the media, you will often try to be much more precise than you would if you did it traditionally, right? Another thing, the zoom feature, right? So the zoom feature is another thing that like kind of breaks and makes digital painting a lot more precise and more taxing, right? So, like I said, if you get a line, right, in your digital painting or your digital drawing, right, you're gonna have to do the whole like control delete, control delete, control delete, control, and there you go. Now I have a good line, right? Whereas in traditional media, right, with a ink brush or a, what do you call it, a brush pen, right? Yes, it's permanent, right? It's permanent, but it's often going to look better, right? That's just the way it is, right? Like I said, if you get the exact same drawing, put it digital versus traditional, it's going to look better, right? Because there's the inherent chaos, right? And like the way the stroke is, right? You have to be more careful, you have to be more precise, right? But then, like I said, there are those miracle moments, but there's also those miracle mistakes, right? The undo button does not exist in real life, right? But there are ways, you know, there's always a way to remove, okay? In most cases, even like pen and ink, you know, you have whiteout, you have a lot of different options to reverse what you've done, right? So there's the scary aspect of it, okay? And so, like, what media is best for you, right? Well, that's your choice, okay? What finish do you like? What artist do you like, right? But I really implore you guys to try both, okay? And to explore both, right? And really get into it, okay? Because there's a lot of people who are traditional artists, right? They only do traditional, and they've never touched Photoshop, and they're scared of the program, right? And to me, that is not something to be like oh, well, I don't ever use digital, you know what I mean, right? That's not something to be snooty about. Like, being incapable of doing something is not something to brag about, okay? And vice versa, right? There's a lot of digital artists who are scared to death of charcoal, of oil, of like so many different medias, right? And that limits you, right? Because the things you could learn from using traditional media will make your digital stuff like compounded way better, okay? That's just the way it is, okay? So like if you do traditional, right, and you transfer those skills to digital, right, and like obviously you know and you're good, right, the effect of what you've learned in traditional will compound like 5 times, right? Because now you have the speed, okay, right? But it doesn't work away the other way around, okay? If you do digital, right, it does not compound your work with traditional, right? Unfortunately, but that's just the way it is. You know, one thing leads into the other, but it doesn't often go both ways. Okay, you know, I've seen people who get better digitally, right? But like I said, they might struggle with like holding a pencil or holding charcoal, right? Because it's like, oh, it's a whole like different like thing, right? I don't know how it works. But like I said, if you really want to get good, if you really want to improve yourself, you got to work with both. Okay, or you could work traditionally, but like I said, you should really learn Photoshop. You should really learn, because that skill is like, it's such a big deal, right? It's like, and like just to get your like a digital copy of your thing, you should really know the program that you're working with, right? But yeah, there's some of the pros and the cons, right? There's still a lot more to say about which one is like the choice for you. I don't think one is better than the other, right? Because it just depends on the artist and the art, right? But the right choice for you as an artist, that's up to you, right? But like I said, I really recommend you guys explore, right? And that you get over the fear of choosing that different thing, right? You got to be able to jump from medium to medium, okay? That's how you become really, really good, right? And when someone asks you, hey, can you do this digital thing? Yeah. Hey, can you do this painting? Yes, right? And that's a place that you want to be at, right? Okay, so I think with that, we can end the video. Please, if you enjoyed this video, hit that like, hit that subscribe, check out my prints and Patreon if you want to support the channel, ring that bell for notification, leave a comment, tell me how you guys feel versus traditional and digital, right? All that bullshit. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks a lot.